Hello, we are live. Welcome to the Hospitality Hotline. It is Thursday at 10 o'clock. My name is Catherine Sasser. I'm so glad you're here. Every week, live on Instagram and Facebook, I answer or address hospitality questions and issues. And today is really fun. Okay, as a framework, I just want to put out there that hospitality always involves three different aspects. There's the food, there's the space, and there's your heart. And today we are going to look at a very food-specific aspect of hospitality. And this happens to be a really fun callback to something I did. Do you remember the Ina in a Year project? Most of you followed along, and this is where I spent one calendar year from September of 2018 to September of 2019, and I cooked all 963 of Ina Garten's published recipes in 1 year. 963 recipes in 365 days. It was called the Ina in a Year project. Okay, so yes, I'm sure you remember. So while I was cooking through all of those recipes, I took really copious notes about not just, notes on the recipes, but notes on the process, notes on preparing and cooking and serving and eating that food, the experience of it. I have just a ton of notes that I took, and I've started to kind of filter through those. And today I'm going to share with you a really fun list that I have compiled called the Worth It, Not Worth It from Scratch list. And here's how it works. So one of the rules that I put on myself for this project it was no substitutions, meaning if a recipe called for me to make homemade pesto, then I made homemade pesto. If it called for homemade mayonnaise, I made homemade mayonnaise. If it called for homemade seafood stock, you get the idea. So I did not substitute unless the recipe said a substitution was fine. So later in her cookbook anthology, Ina would start to suggest that instead of making caramel sauce from scratch, a wonderful store-bought caramel sauce will be great. So if there was the option to substitute, then I substituted. But if not, I would make it from scratch as the recipe instructed. So what happened was, because I was following the rules of the project, I ended up making from scratch several things that I probably would not have made outside of the project. Some of them I had made before, some of them I had not, and never would I have made them. So I got to see firsthand things that were worth it to make from scratch and things that were kind of like, this is not worth it. So here's how I want to define this for us. In my opinion, if something is worth it, it really does stand out, make a difference, affect the finished product. It's worth any time or effort or money or anything involved because it just elevates the entire thing. If something is not worth it, it's kind of the opposite of all that. Like, no, this is not worth the fuss. This is not worth the cost. You can't really tell that big a difference in the finished product. So that's what not worth it means. So the list that I put together is organized in pairs, one worth it, one not worth it, and there are 15 pairs that we're gonna go through today, and we're just gonna have fun with it. If you have questions about any of these, please feel free to ask them either live or after the fact whenever you're watching this. I would love to answer them. I happen to know a lot about all things Ina after this project, and I love to talk about it. So let me know if you have questions. Okay, pair number one. This is a great basic place to start. This is never necessary, but it is totally worth it. It was one of the first experiences I had of the project. Chicken stock. Homemade chicken stock is worth it every time. It is the best. And I can't even really put into words. So yes, I can put it into words. In fact, I'm gonna do that right now. So there's chicken stock in all of her books. I made every batch of chicken stock in total throughout the year. It was almost primal, or like this soul satisfying process of, you put chicken and vegetables in a big pot, you cover it with water, you let it simmer. It turns into this stuff that does not even compare to what you buy on the store shelf, which 9 times out of 10, I'm buying store-bought chicken stock. So don't hear me say that I make chicken stock every time, but it is worth it. It's worth it. It's so good. Any soup that I made using homemade chicken stock, any dish that called for chicken stock when I would use homemade, you could taste the difference. You could feel the difference in the texture. It's just at the top of my worth it list would be chicken stock. Okay, not worth it is beef stock. Don't waste your time. It's super expensive. It's very involved. I guess there is perhaps a better flavor with homemade beef stock, in my opinion. Not worth it. Find a good canned beef broth that you like. Okay, number 2. This is another totally transformative thing that will up whatever you're making, and the worth it is seafood stock. I know this sounds like a lot of when I thought about making homemade seafood stock, I imagined it to be very difficult and involved. In fact, it's the fastest stock you can make. Several of her recipes call for homemade seafood stock. It takes about 20 or 30 minutes, and most of the ingredients are the shells from the shrimp that you're cooking for whatever it is, the soup or the stew or the whatever. It's a very quick process. It's not hours and hours on the stove. It's not a long list of ingredients that only go to make the stock. It's, like I said, it's the shells from the shrimp, perhaps a few aromatics, sometimes it has tomato paste in it, whatever. And the stuff you buy on the, I bought what am I trying to say? Oh my gosh, like pre-packaged, shelf stable in a carton seafood stock. And I also bought from the seafood counter at Central Market, their like fresh seafood stock. Not even close. Homemade seafood stock might be the most transformative way to take the flavor of any seafood dish and just blow it out of the water. It is incredible. Totally worth it every time. Don't skip that step. Not worth it, vegetable stock. And I realize that this may be because I'm never in a position to where I want to intentionally turn something vegetarian. And so perhaps if I were a vegetarian, I would feel differently about this. But I think vegetable stock is not worth it. I just didn't find that to be of any great value to the finished dish. All right, pair number 3. I want to say that this was quite an emotional experience for me. The worth it was applesauce. Homemade applesauce. I think I made it 3 times. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There were 2 apple versions and one that was apple and pear. Listen to me. Once in your life, make homemade applesauce, preferably in winter, but honestly, there's not a bad time. It is unreal how delicious it is. I want to go on record as saying homemade applesauce blew me away, and it became this, I have a distinct memory of eating a bowl of the homemade applesauce in my bed after a really long, hard day and thinking, this is the most incredible thing I have ever made from scratch, ever. The not worth it, surprisingly, is vanilla. Homemade vanilla is not worth it. Vanilla beans are super expensive. Vanilla extract is super expensive. I really expected this to be worth it somehow, and I made 2 batches of it because there were 2 different recipes, and we let it steep, and I've used it, and you know what? It's fine. It's fine. I made vanilla. I did it, you guys. I made homemade vanilla. It's on my shelf at my house. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's not any better than the true, pure vanilla extract I buy at the store. So unless you just want to be crafty and make your own vanilla extract, it's not worth it. Okay, I got a question I'm gonna answer real quick. Are beef stock and beef broth the same? In my language, stock and broth are interchangeable. I think there's probably some technical difference that stock is one thing and broth is another, and particularly in the age of bone broth, which is just like beef stock or chicken stock that's been cooked even, reduced even more. I'm using them interchangeably. Some recipes delineate, I don't know what the difference is, but in my world, stock and broth are the same. Okay, pair number 4. This is about knowing when to work smarter, not harder. Worth it from homemade is pie crust. I'm just gonna say it. Homemade pie crust is worth it. Kind of like chicken stock, if I'm in a hurry, I have learned that a Pillsbury brand, not generic brand, but a Pillsbury brand refrigerated pie crust will get you through whatever pie emergency you find yourself in. But if you're going to go to the trouble to make pie, and pie is trouble, pie is not easy, pie is trouble. If you're going to go to the trouble, homemade pie crust is worth it. It has a quality about it that you can't get from the shelf. That real butter and that mixed by hand, it's far and away better than anything you can buy at the store. But not worth it are all the other homemade breads that I made. I made challah or challah, I made white bread, and I made brioche. Were they good? They were. I made bread. It's kind of like, a very nice sense of accomplishment. It's not something we do every day. It's delicious, whatever. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. I think bread is super earthy and beautiful. I love bread. I also live in a city where I have access to excellent homemade breads, and to make bread from scratch just because is not something that aligns with my reality. Now, if I were a person that wanted to become really good and skilled at making bread, I would give it all my attention, and that could be like a hobby. Bread making, it's like knitting or something. Like it becomes a hobby, and it's how you spend your spare time. But as far as like just cooking in the kitchen, homemade bread, go find a really excellent version of store-bought homemade bread. All right, pair number 5. The lesson to learn here is primarily, let me back up a second. Because there were no substitutions, and because I followed the recipes to a T, tell me if this is true when you have a recipe you're making at home and it calls for a couple tablespoons of some obscure alcohol that no one has on their shelf. You're like, I'll skip it. It'll be fine without it. Well, me too, like same. In the project, I did not skip anything. We have a trove of obscure alcohol that's sitting over there on the shelf that we bought so that we could make everything as written. And the lesson I learned is it's worth it. Those 2 tablespoons of whatever it is worth it. So just note to self, skipping alcohol in a recipe, it's fine. It's just not going to be the same. And in that vein, worth it, jalapeno tequila. We infused some tequila with jalapenos and my mouth is watering, made the best margaritas I have ever had in my life during cocktail and stock week. It was insane. And it took less than 24 hours because the jalapeno is so pungent. You soak it in the tequila. In fact, we kind of wished, I say we because the staff enjoyed this with me here at Hurley House. It was really fun and communal. I kind of wished I had soaked it less. It was so spicy. It was really spicy. But not worth it was raspberry vodka. One of the first things we infused was this vodka with raspberries, and it had to sit for a really long time, and the raspberries ended up, they started the color of my sweatshirt, and by the end they were the color of my shirt, and all the color had leached into the vodka, and it was really beautiful, and we made a cocktail with it, except it just didn't taste like anything. It just wasn't that special. So worth it, jalapeno tequila. Not worth it, raspberry vodka. Moving on, number 6. I really didn't want this to be true, but it's true. Worth it, homemade tortilla chips. Not worth it, homemade potato chips. And here's why. And I'm not talking about tortilla chips for a Super Bowl party or tortilla chips to throw into a bowl and serve as a snack to a lot of people. That's clearly buy those in a bag. I'm talking about, I think the recipe this went with was some sort of tortilla soup or pozole or something, but I'm talking about the tortilla chips that are served as an accompaniment or a garnish or something with the main dish. They were so good, and they were dusted in this chili powder and the salt and the hot oil. They were far and away better than anything you can get out of a bag. I even made them. We ate as many as we wanted. I saved them. I went back the next day. They're incredible. Homemade tortilla chips, thumbs up. Thumbs down, homemade potato chips. No. Don't even, no. It's so fussy. All the slicing and the hot oil, and at the end of it, they're just not that good. They're not that good. It's kind of like bread. It's just better to get a good version of potato chips. All right, pair number 7. I want you to look me in the eyes because it's really important. I feel strongly about this. I felt strongly about this before the project, and I feel strongly about it today. Worth it is homemade whipped cream. Homemade whipped cream is not even close to Cool Whip or the thing you get in the can, the Ready Whip. I know that's easier. Homemade whipped cream literally takes 60 seconds and will blow your mind every time. You could take store-bought cookies, make some homemade whipped cream, put them on top, and they're incredible. Homemade whipped cream. Don't mess around. It's always worth it. It's not even up for debate. Not worth it, homemade pesto. No. I think when Ina began writing her cookbooks, which, if memory serves, her first one was published in 1999. So we're looking at, 20 years ago. Pesto was not readily available in grocery stores, or I don't remember it. I remember there was like that refrigerated section of Bertolli, like that was innovative, and I think they had like a pesto-y type thing. And so maybe making homemade pesto was something that was necessary 20 years ago, that now the things that we have at our disposal are far and away as good, if not better, than what I made in my kitchen from scratch using basil and garlic and all that. I know a lot of people feel very strongly about homemade pesto, and by all means, if you grow basil and you love making it, have at it. I just found myself kind of like, I could get something that's equally fine, particularly if it's an ingredient in another dish. I do not need to make homemade pesto. All right, moving on. Pair number 8. This one is not difficult, and if you followed the project on Instagram, you saw me, and I loved learning to make this, but worth it from scratch is homemade ricotta. Goodness gracious. I wish we called it something different, because the homemade version is not even close to the thing you buy in the plastic tub at the store, even the expensive brands. Homemade ricotta is very easy, it's very quick, and it is sublime when done well. It is worth it every time. Put that on a grilled piece of bread with some blistered tomatoes in the summer and call it dinner. Not worth it from scratch, hummus. I'm not into it. I'm just not into it. It doesn't taste, I don't know. And here's my issue. I know that for hummus to be really smooth, you're supposed to remove the little kind of the skins from around the chickpeas. And do you know who doesn't have time to remove skins from chickpeas in order to make homemade hummus? Is this girl. I made it several times. She has several different variations. The one that stuck out in my mind that we did actually love, and actually was a part of our summer menu last summer here at Hurley House, was the butternut squash hummus. So maybe that's the exception to the rule. That one is 100% worth it. Try that recipe. But generally speaking, kind of like pesto, homemade hummus just fell flat for me. Okay, moving on. Pair number 9. These two things are so close to each other, but like totally different experiences. Worth it from homemade is homemade granola. Oh my God, it's so good. Homemade granola is definitely worth it. Make a huge batch, keep it in your pantry, eat it as a snack, put it on your yogurt. Not worth it from scratch are granola bars. I don't know where the breakdown happens, because these taste delicious. I mean, it's basically like granola that's like, compressed into a pan and then cut. I could never get the bars to keep their shape. I just think it turns into like a crumbly, actually you're just eating a little bag of granola, so why not just make granola? So very close, but totally far away. Don't waste your time on granola bars, but go for it on the homemade granola. Okay, pair number 10. I was surprised by how extreme my feelings were on this, because ice cream happens to be my favorite dessert. Not sure if you knew that about me. I cannot keep it in the house. I love ice cream. Anyway, worth it from scratch is homemade ice cream. Homemade ice cream is worth it. It's worth the special small appliance that you have to buy. It's worth the time. It's worth it. Except for that one, and if you followed the project, you remember the caramel ice cream that never froze. Forget that one. All the other of her ice creams were totally worth it. Not worth it, sorbet. I don't know what the deal is. Every time I made homemade sorbet in the project, I was really disappointed. Like, it's kind of gritty and grainy, and I'm sure there's some science about the ice and the sugar and all that, but like, really not worth it. The exception to that is there's a recipe for chocolate sorbet, which is like midnight black, just rich, amazing, dairy-free. if you're looking for a dairy-free frozen dessert, that was amazing. But generally speaking, worth it, ice cream, not worth it, sorbet. Okay, pair number 11. Okay, this gets super annoying. Totally worth it to make homemade chocolate sauce from scratch. It's easy. Chocolate sauce is easy. Not worth it, any other like chocolatier type thing, meaning truffles or bark, and she has you do this thing where, I mean, it's not her, but chocolate has to be tempered, and don't ask me what that means because I don't even really understand it, even though I've tried to understand it. It's something about like, it's got to be moving, it's got to be at the right temperature, it's got to cool, and if you don't, it's grainy and it's whatever, and people spend their lives devoted to the study of chocolate. It's not worth it. From home, buy truffles, buy bark, like whatever. Make your own chocolate sauce because it's relatively easy, it's delicious, and you can buy really high quality chocolate and you can keep it and all that, but like the chocolate truffles and the chocolate bark were a big no thank you. Pair number 12. This is a life lesson everyone should learn, and we might do a summer cook-along series on this topic because I think it is really important for all the home cooks to know this. Worth it from scratch, 10 times out of 10, homemade salad dressing. It's the best. I don't care what kind or variety. I don't like creamy vinaigrette. I don't care. Homemade salad dressing is easy. It's worth it. And even the ones that require a little bit of effort are worth it. There's nothing on a grocery store shelf that compares to homemade salad dressing. Not worth it from scratch, making your own mayonnaise. The French, or the fancy word for mayonnaise is aioli. So just remember, anytime you see the word aioli on a menu, that's just mayonnaise. And if it's a flavored aioli, that's mayonnaise with flavoring in it. So if you have sriracha aioli, that is mayonnaise with sriracha in it. It's not worth it to make mayonnaise from scratch. You can, if you're interested, you certainly can. Hellmann's is the same. And you get it out of the jar and it's the same, and you can doctor it up. You can add sriracha. You can add all manner of flavorings. You can do a lot with mayonnaise. You don't need to make mayonnaise from scratch, but you do need to make salad dressing. It's so good. It's a life lesson. Okay, we're almost done. Pair number 13. This is very adventurous and it will require a little bit of you, but once you do it, you're never gonna go back. Speaking from experience. Worth it, marshmallows. Have you ever made homemade marshmallows? Have you ever eaten homemade marshmallows? You will laugh at the stuff in the package after you have had homemade marshmallows. We make them here at Hurley House in December. I should have kept track. Like, we have probably sold 1 million homemade marshmallows because they are so far and away better than any store-bought option. And they are messy, but they're not difficult. And we always marvel at this when December comes around and we start making them again because we're like, oh, the marshmallows. And we get into it, we're like, that's not hard. It's a little bit messy, but it's not hard. You can do it. So homemade marshmallows are worth it. Not worth it are homemade donuts. Nobody needs to make homemade donuts. You have to buy a special pan. It's basically like muffin batter that's just baked in a pan with a hole in it. Like it's not the same like getting donuts from the store. Go to the donut store for donuts. Skip the homemade donuts, but don't skip the homemade marshmallows. Pair number 14. This would perhaps be my number one worth it thing. If you do one thing from homemade, this is the easiest, simplest way to up your game in the kitchen, is freshly ground cracked pepper. I used to scoff at this. I used to hear Ina say, or anyone for that matter, always use freshly ground cracked pepper. I'd be like, yeah. I'm just gonna get the stuff that's already ground in the jar because that's faster and I can scoop it and go. It just cannot make that big of a difference. I was wrong, and I am not ashamed to admit that I was 100% wrong about this. I have started now, like outside the project, in my daily life, using freshly ground cracked pepper. I have a, not a big deal, tiny little electric spice grinder that I keep in my spice cabinet place just for the pepper. I buy the peppercorns, I put them in, I whir it around, I fill a ramekin with pepper, and when it's out, I do it again. So I'm not doing it in the moment. I just create a little container of freshly ground cracked pepper that we use. So much pepper flavor. If you like black pepper, You're going to be wowed by how much flavor comes when you grind your own. I don't mean to sound ridiculous about it, but it really is worth it. It really is simple. It's not difficult. Not worth it? Dog biscuits. Who knew? Like, I don't think of Ina being like a dog person. It's not part of her story, whatever, but in one of her cookbooks, she has this recipe for dog biscuits. So we looked around, finally found the dog cookie cutter that she calls for. We have a dog. If you watch any of my videos, you'll hear him in the background. He's so annoying. His name is Henry. My children love him, therefore he stays. We made these dog biscuits with my kids, and the process of making them with my children was fun. And Henry ate them, but Henry would eat his own vomit. Like, Henry doesn't care. Like, he's a dog. And if you want to do this as a fun activity with your children, sorry. Was that too far? Sometimes I can't tell. I apologize if that was too far. But if you want to go through the process of making homemade dog bones with your children, or if you just love animals and want to do it, there's a fabulous recipe for it. But hear me say, I just don't know that it mattered to make homemade dog bones from scratch. So take that with an enormous grain of salt. I did not find them worth it. They were cute, but I didn't find them worth it. Okay. Last one, pair number 15, worth it, not worth it. And this one pains me because I could make this argument and then switch them and make the same argument. So I'm gonna do that. Worth it from scratch, jam, homemade jam. Not worth it from scratch, homemade caramel sauce. Okay, let me argue it this way first. Homemade jam is amazing. Fresh fruit, sugar, water, boiled until it, becomes jam, is just amazing. My kids have very strong sense memories of this season in my life where I made a lot of homemade jam. They love it, they ask for it. You can make skillet jam. I have a recipe for skillet jam on my blog, and the thing that's great about skillet jam is it's a very small batch. It's not like, glugs and glugs of it. It's small batch. You can make it while the toast is toasting. But it's just delicious, particularly in the summer. Go to the farmer's market, get fresh fruit. Not worth it from scratch is homemade caramel sauce, and here's why. There's just a lot of really high quality store-bought caramel sauces that you can buy that taste just like homemade. Okay, now let me switch on you. Sometimes homemade caramel sauce is 100% worth it. If you've ever eaten homemade caramel sauce on a spoon, you know it's amazing. I made some yesterday for Hurley House, and I took a generous lick of that bowl and was like, God, this really is good. But it takes a little bit of time and effort. It takes a tiny bit of skill. It's one of those, like, I really could make an argument. And jam, it's trouble too. So these two are kind of like, I don't know, I could go back and forth. But jam and caramel, depending on the brand, are both worth it and not worth it. And on that confusing note, we're gonna end. This has been super fun. Thank you for letting me just kind of go through my list and share them with you. If you have any questions about any of my very strong opinions about pesto or hummus or dog bones, you know where to find me. Next week, we are going to be talking about the hospitality of weddings and registering. And I bet you have some funny, painful, interesting, insightful stories to share. So be thinking of those. I would love to hear questions or, firsthand experiences of when things went particularly wrong or maybe particularly well. But we're going to be talking about weddings and registries. Thank you so much for being here. Have a lovely week.